So welcome everyone. This is Temple Israel's adult education program, and one of the ones that we really think is very special. We have the pleasure of speaking with David Schenker tonight, and David Schenker brings some amazing insight into our program. You've seen from the advertisement, it's the status of things in the Middle East, especially in Israel, and I think all of us need to know more. Certainly I do, and as I said, with the negotiations with Iran concerning the nuclear program, things are becoming more tenuous as we speak. So David has lots of good topics to talk about. And as I said, for those just joining, if you have questions, please put them in chat. And at the end, I'll kind of feed David the questions so that I'm not repeating too many. And we look forward to a really stimulating conversation. And as I said, I don't know if David's got all the answers, but he probably has a few more answers than we do. So David, welcome, good evening, and please share.
Well, it's good to be with my home synagogue again. I was bar mitzvah there. I spent a great deal of time in Hebrew school there, more than I'd like to account, on Monday and Wednesday afternoons and Sundays as well. It's a pleasure to be with you. Listen, I am just by way of background, I'm a think tanker. I work at a place called the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is sort of one of the premier Middle East think tanks in town. There are fellows who study the broad range of Middle East issues, ranging from Morocco to Iran to Yemen to Turkey, economic, political, social, but a focus on advising administrations, Republican and Democrat alike. We are a nonpartisan think tank, and one of the few think tanks that doesn't take any money from foreign governments, only from American citizens. I've been there on and off since 1998. I started and I left in 2000. And two, right after 9/11, I went to the Pentagon for 4 years, served as a Middle East advisor in the office of Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, and then went back to the Institute in late 2006, and was there until I got a call to be in charge of the Middle East in the first Trump administration, working for Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of Defense. I worked for him for about 2 years. And then I went back to my old think tank, the Washington Institute. There's so much to talk about. I think what's on everybody's mind, obviously, is Iran. And so I'm going to talk quite a bit about Iran. The United States has amassed a pretty big armada and has flowed assets to the region. We have the Abe Lincoln aircraft carrier, which has about 7 different warships with it, missile cruisers, nuclear submarine, other assets. In about 2 weeks, the Gerald Ford will arrive in the region to complement that huge deployment. And we have done other things. The United States has done other things to, I think, prepare ourselves for eventual military operations against Iran, including, and this seems maybe counterintuitive, but to move our forces away from Iran. So we have a base called Ali Salam in Kuwait. We've moved much of our assets out of there. Further to the west, we have a base in Kuwait called Al Udeid, which is our largest base in the Middle East. We moved many of our assets away from there. We have a base in the United Arab Emirates called Al Dhafra, an Air Force base. We've moved a lot of our assets away from there. And we're sitting in the Arabian Gulf, waiting to see what happens. And we're engaged in negotiation. How did we get here? Well, you remember that in December and early January, we had these enormous protests in Iran. President Trump said, if the regime massacres people. There'll be, I think he said, all hell to pay. We sort of missed that boat because the massacres occurred on January 8th and 9th. We don't know the numbers, but the estimates are between 5,000 and 30,000 people killed in a 2-day period. The protests have subsided, but we dispatched forces to the region. We have aircraft on the way. We have aircraft in the area ready to operate. Aerial refueling have flowed not only aerial refueling jets, but F-35s from elsewhere, F-22s, fighter Stryker jets, stealth fighters, and they are all on station. And once again, the Gerald Ford, United States' largest aircraft carrier, will arrive in 10 days to 2 weeks from now. So what is the goal here? All right, we missed the boat on punishing Iran or protecting the protesters. President Trump says he wants a nuclear deal. But let's look back on the nuclear deal. President Trump got out of the Obama era nuclear deal back in 2018 during the first term, before the Biden presidency. And he said at the time that it was the worst deal ever. Why was it the worst deal ever? Because one, it allowed Iran the right to enrich uranium. And there's a problem because even if you have IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran cheats. The second is that the agreement didn't include anything about advanced ballistic missiles. The third point that Trump made at the time was that it didn't include anything about Iran's ability or willingness to fund the proxies, which is its proxy armies to destabilize the Middle East. We're talking about Hezbollah in Lebanon, what Richard Armitage in 2002, after the 9/11 destruction of the World Trade Center, a group that Richard Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of State, described as the A team of terrorism. It didn't deal with Hezbollah in Lebanon, a group that the Iranian government created in 1981, 82. It didn't deal with the Iranian-backed militia in in Iraq, which is, I don't know, it's called 100,000 strong militiamen in the service of Iran, which, by the way, fired 150 drones at Israel after October 7th and killed 3 Israeli soldiers in the Golan. It didn't deal with the Houthis, the group that runs more than half of Yemen right now. And, we can talk about other groups too, like Hamas or others that Hamas funds as well, that Iran funds as well. So President Trump laid out that they had to deal with all these organizations at the time. They've also restated that. The White House has said that any agreement going forward with Iran has to deal with all these issues: the ballistic missiles, the proxies, the nuclear, and also they've added another one, which is not to murder protesters. This is a tall order for the Trump administration. I'd say, in a way, they've backed themselves into a corner because Iran right now is negotiating on the nuclear program. And they have agreed to either dilute the highly enriched uranium, the 450 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that are now buried in a mountain in either Natanz, Fordo, or Isfahan. What we did at the last day of the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, or they have agreed to dilute uranium to bring it down to a lower concentration of enrichment. As it stands, they have enough for maybe 10 nuclear weapons. That's a good thing. But what Iran has not agreed to do to date is to end their so-called right to enrichment. So we have a quandary here. The administration is thinking about different formulas, perhaps to allow Iran after 3 years, and this is what Iran has offered, that they wouldn't enrich uranium for 3 years. But this isn't much of a concession because, of course, the United States, according to President Trump, obliterated the nuclear program, dropping these, 24,000-pound bombs on these 3 sites that are built into mountains. They're not going to be able to build nuclear weapons or get a nuclear program back for 3 years anyway. So we have a couple options here. One is that the president, and I believe the president really wants a deal. But the president has a number of options. He can get a deal, perhaps on nuclear, but the deal, I think, will be ultimately limited and may include some degree of enrichment. If you were in a room with me, I would ask you what you think what President Trump really doesn't want to be compared to. Is there anybody out there can raise their hand and tell me what President Trump doesn't want to be compared to? Anybody? I don't see anybody. Yeah, we have Stacy.
Off the top of my head, I know you're going for a specific person, but a loser? He doesn't want to be a loser?
Well, okay. So for President Trump, the definition of loser is President Obama. And President Obama signed the nuclear deal that didn't deal with either the proxies, the advanced ballistic missiles, and allowed Iran to enrich, right? So if the president signs an agreement that allows Iran after 3 years to enrich, this will be, well, I hate to say it, but sort of like NAFTA, right? The president got out of NAFTA because after the JCPOA, after the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that the nuclear deal President Obama signed, I think President Trump would say that was the second worst deal that President Obama signed. And President Trump canceled NAFTA, and he got into the North American Mexico-Canada trade agreement. That was basically NAFTA, but slightly better. He doesn't want that comparison. So I don't think he's going to sign a deal that only includes nuclear, particularly if Iran has the right to enrich. But he's raised a very high bar, right, by including not only enrichment and getting rid of the highly enriched uranium, but also including the proxies and the advanced ballistic missiles. So where do we go from here? Well, we have naval aircraft carriers on station, right? We have the Abraham Lincoln, once again, an aircraft carrier, 7 missile cruisers, and a nuclear submarine. A lot of firepower in the region, and then the aircraft that are in the region, and then the Abraham Lincoln showing up soon. Does President Trump want a war? Right? What does he want from a war? Remember, he deployed here in the first instance because he issued a threat against Iran for killing innocent civilians in vast numbers. Will he punish Iran for killing the protesters? When he arrived in the region, he changed the issue to the nuclear program. So now we're talking about a nuclear deal. Is it going to be enough? I don't know the answer to that question. But at the same time, you have to remember that, as we said earlier, President Trump doesn't want to be compared to President Obama. President Obama is most famous in the Middle East for for the red line on the Syrian nuclear program. Sorry, the Syrian chemical weapons program. When President Obama said that if the Assad regime in Syria used chemical weapons, that he would attack them if they used chemical weapons against their own people. He didn't attack them ultimately. President Trump criticized them heavily. I don't think President Trump wants to be compared to President Obama either. So you have all these assets in the region, a high bar. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Every military option or military situation in the region, there is always the United States military that provides a broad range of options to the president, from small to big, right? And so we have the president who recently talked about regime change in Tehran, saying this was probably the best option. And I think the president's right. This regime is not going to change the nature of its behavior. This is a revolutionary regime that's looking to destabilize neighboring states, spread the so-called Islamic revolution. And so that's not going to happen. The regime is never going to really, truly change its behavior. But we have, a broad range of options. So the president can go regime change. He can do a sustained long-term campaign targeting regime assets, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. He can target the Basij, which is the apparatus of repression that killed those 5,000 to 30,000 Iranian protesters. He can go after symbolic targets like Ayatollah Khomeini's a mausoleum. There are a broad range of targets, and there are more. He can go after the energy sector. I don't know what he wants to do, but we have a couple models here, right? We have Venezuela, and I think the president understands that the U.S. military is incredibly effective and can do operations with low casualties. He did Venezuela. He didn't do regime change. He did leadership change. That very same regime is there. But of course, if he does leadership change, that leaves the IRGC in power, which is not something that either benefits the United States or Israel. He can do lesser operations or greater operations. It's a broad range of what he can do. But as in all military conflict, Iran has a vote. And so we've heard from the very beginning from Saudi Arabia, from the United Arab Emirates, from Qatar, from other U.S. Arab partners, that they don't want a regional destabilization. They don't know what will happen if the U.S. strikes Iran. The last time this happened in 12-day war, Iran did a largely symbolic attack against the U.S. military base in Qatar. We shot down the missiles, but they had big warheads. If they hit their targets, it would have been significant damage to the base. We had most of our people off the base. But if the regime feels like it's being threatened, it has hypersonic missiles that it can fire against U.S. aircraft carriers. We don't have a very good answer for that yet.
So, David, let me interrupt just for a minute.
Let me just finish the last point here. Sorry,
Okay.
Bob.
Go ahead.
so our Arab partners have said, don't do it. I think Israel itself, right, our key partner in the Middle East, an ally, has mixed feelings about this. They want to get a deal that takes away not only Iran's nuclear program, but its ballistic missile program. But I can ask all of you out there, what commitment has
Why can't I hear him?
success? I'm hearing somebody not on mute out there. What commitment has the United States made to Israel? Successive administrations, they've said nothing ever about Iran's ballistic missile program. They've only talked about not allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. This would be upping the game if we actually included this as a key U.S. priority and a commitment to Israel. The other thing is, and Bob, I'll end with this. Israel has mixed feelings about another war. The United States, when we have 2 aircraft carriers in the region, we have a lot of assets on station and can handle this problem. But Iran has, 2,000 ballistic missiles, right? Before the war, the 12-day war, Iran was producing 120 a month. After, they're down to about 60 a month, but they still have about 2,000. Israel took care of a lot of missile launchers, but not all of them. So, and what we didn't see in the last, let's say, 12 days, 2 days of the war, Israel, we all love Israel, but on strategic issues, they have censorship. You don't see where missiles are landing. And they hit a lot of their targets in the last 2-4 days of the war. The United States itself has dispatched 2 more batteries of THAAD missiles. These are high altitude interceptors. In the first 12 days of the war, the 12-day war, the United States depleted 20 to 25% of its global supply of missile interceptors, right? So what we're putting in Israel right now is probably taking out of Taiwan, right? So the United States doesn't have indefinite assets. And I would add that Israel has depleted a lot of its own missile assets, not only Iron Dome, which are for close range, but David Sling for medium range, and most importantly, the Arrow missile, which are longer range interceptors, higher altitude. So they're going to withstand some damage, even if the United States does a good job here. And I think, this is not a walk in the park. So that's only Iran. Listen, Bobby, you want me to wrap up now? I'm happy to talk about Gaza later, Syria later, and Lebanon later. Thank you.
Well, you answered the questions, some of them that I was going to ask as you got to the end, wanting to know how it impacts the neighbors in Israel, and you did speak to that. So kudos for responding to that quickly. There are other neighbors in the region in addition to Israel, and they're all going to be impacted on whatever decisions comes out of this. And I don't know who you think is most affected by this, whether it's Jordan or Egypt or Syria. Not Syria. It could be even Syria. I'm not sure. Saudis. I'm not sure how the rest of the region is viewing this. Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah. Well, listen. I mean, for the Gulf, we've had something like $60 a barrel in for the past half a year, reflecting lower global demand, marginal stability for transporting the commodity globally. $60 a barrel is break-even costs for a lot of these countries. They can't do what they want to do domestically. We've seen Saudi Arabia scale back its what they call the Vision 2030, that plans to diversify and build out their economy and do these mega projects. UAE too is affected, Qatar, and U.S. oil companies not, investing so much. We, obviously, Exxon's not going to invest in Venezuela. when oil prices are $60 a barrel, which is, really break even. So I think all these countries are worried about what regime change might mean. And, regime change is ultimately the answer for Iran. But the country has huge Azeri, population. They're not all Persian. They're not all loyal to the state. And we remember what happened in Iraq, which is you topple a central government and all the neighbors start playing in your country. So whether this is Turkey, whether this is Afghanistan, in the case of Iran, I think a lot of the neighbors are worried about prefer a weak necessarily as opposed to a destabilized government in Tehran, even as atrocious as it is. So, yeah, I mean,
okay, that makes good sense.
Yeah.
Makes good sense. But you're correct. We'd love to have you move on to Gaza. Are we in 2.0? We still see the military engaging Hamas, and we don't know where the peace plan supposedly is. I know we have the idea of immediacy and finding a solution, and this may take a longer negotiation, but there are a lot of people involved in a country that's been destroyed. And I don't know if you have any feedback for us as how Israel is engaging Gaza and how Hamas is being dealt with. Any feedback would be great.
Yeah, I mean, this obviously complicated issue. Next week, we have the so-called Board of Peace meeting in Washington. I think one of the reasons why Netanyahu came last week to Washington to meet Trump for two reasons. One is he wanted to talk about what the nuclear negotiation was going to look like and encourage Trump, the president, not to make a deal only on nuclear. The second reason why he came is because he didn't want to be here this week sitting with, the president of Turkey and the emir of Qatar, and these are not his friends. Right. And so he's sending maybe his foreign minister or somebody else. But at this meeting, President Trump wants, he declared a couple of months ago when he got the ceasefire, which was an amazing thing, an accomplishment for any U.S. president to get out all the Israeli hostages who had been held, for 400-500 days, and, just horrific conditions, and bringing home all the bodies of the murdered Israelis. But President declared peace in the Middle East, right? That's what he said, where we got peace in the Middle East. And so what does that mean? Well, he said we're moving it along. We sent Jared to the Middle East. He rolled out a plan to rebuild Gaza. He said in 100 days, we're going to start clearing and rebuilding. We got what do they call it, Gaza Laga, or maybe it's or the what do they call it, he had a couple of names for this. So we're not quite there yet, but right now we're debating the fundamental point of the Gaza peace plan, which was Hamas disarming. Right. And so the president wants to move this along, but Hamas has not agreed to disarm. So we have today a discussion, and this is like, for me, okay, you guys are at the synagogue, right? I don't know if this is a biblical reference, but how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, right? This is, for Hamas, this is what constitutes a heavy weapon. Hamas has to give up their heavy weapons. So perhaps in Texas, an AK-47 isn't a heavy weapon, right? But or an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, right? We know they're going to give up their rockets, the Qassams that can fly to Tel Aviv. Are they going to give up RPGs? Are they going to give up their AK-47s? This is actually unbelievably what's being debated right now. Now, they made the 100-day. Jared said 100 days for his proposal to move forward, because if you want to start doing anything in Gaza, you can't have 20, 30,000 men walking around with AK-47s. There's no way anything can be done with these men heavily armed. Now, you want to have a 9mm, it's bad, but AK-47, I think we can all agree this is unacceptable. And this is actually what's being debated right now. We still haven't gotten there. But we do have commitments from foreign governments to serve as this part of this phase two, which Trump wants to move on to, which includes the International Stabilization Force. And the International Stabilization Force is not going into Hamas-controlled territory, because they were never intended to actually disarm Hamas. They're going into the Israeli-controlled portion of Gaza. Israel controls 57% of Gaza right now. They're going there. But if you really want this thing to work, it's got to be the whole of Gaza, right? They've got to go elsewhere. And they've got a commitment by Indonesia. I mean, Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim population country, which is a pretty big deal. I think that's a great thing. And if you recall, back at UNGA, at the UN General Assembly, the president of Indonesia said in front of the world that Israel had a right to have secure borders and not be attacked by terrorists. It seems like a small thing, but coming from Indonesia, I think it's a pretty significant thing. So they're going to deploy, but Israel doesn't want them to go into Gaza to be killed by Hamas, nor do they want UAE, United Arab Emirates, or Jordan, or Egypt to go into its territory and be murdered by Hamas. So we have a long way to go on the disarmament. But I would say this Board of Peace meeting, Israel has like great supporter, even incredibly indulgent supporter in President Trump, maybe overindulgent. But the Board of Peace is really a mixed bag for Israel. And I think this is why they're not particularly enthusiastic about it, because the Board of Peace has a broader membership that is not so supportive of Israel necessarily.
Can you give us any feedback as to the interactions with Israel in its management of the Gazan situation? I only hear and see reports of destitute people living in tents in the winter, and the constant issue of food and passage between Egypt and crossings. And it always feels unsettling to me that Israel's ability to control that region leaves people in a terrible state and condition. I don't have an answer, don't know any better. Can you give me a better sense that is Israel handling things well and we just don't know any better? Or this is just a situation, politics in Israel is not allowing it to work?
Yeah, Bob, I think I mentioned to you earlier, as Kissinger said, there's no foreign policy in Israel. There's only domestic policy, and that influences, foreign policy in Israel. The United States has said publicly that Rafah crossing is open, that there are sufficient number of calories flowing into Gaza every day. There's also, of course, commercial goods flowing into Gaza that they didn't have before. If you look at the videos, and I don't know if these are, but you have influencers out of Gaza going to great restaurants and eating great cakes and baklava or whatnot. It's misery in Gaza, right? People don't have homes. But I think there is sufficient humanitarian goods going in right now. Hamas appears to still be pirating a certain amount of them. This is not a good situation. I don't know if there's any way around it. the key issue here, and we saw this after every Israeli military operation in Gaza, is that Hamas somehow manages to smuggle in dual-use equipment or goods like cement to build, a metro system that is larger than, the underground tube in London. And whether that's lack of international supervision, whether they're going to get it right this time, I think they're trying to take more care here, getting more supervision about what goes in. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of housing in Gaza right now. It's a humanitarian crisis. There is food. I don't think there's starvation, but there's suffering, and I think all of us can recognize that. The degree to which that is Israel's fault or Hamas's fault, I think, will be debated for the ages.
Well, I think that's a tough debate for sure. But let me take a step back to a couple of questions that came in, and you can see if you can respond to them. I guess one of them is, why should Iran trust Trump? And the economic sanctions on Iran before military sanctions, which do you think will happen there?
So I love that question. Why should Iran trust Trump? Why should Trump or the United States trust Iran? They cheat. They cheat on everything. There's a long history of this. Israel stole at one point. So I worked for Mike Pompeo, and I had a job interview for him. I got hired under Tillerson, and hadn't still been confirmed by the Senate. And so I had this meeting with Pompeo after he took over from Tillerson, before I got confirmed by the Senate, to make sure he still was going to hire me. And I sat down with him. We had a Diet Coke, and I asked Pompeo about how the Israelis, because he had been head of the CIA before he was at State Department. I asked him, hey, did you ever find out how the Israelis stole the Iranian nuclear archive out of downtown Tehran? And he said, yeah, I sat down with the head of the Mossad, at the time, this guy Yossi Cohn, and he told me this story. And Pompeo is very funny. He said, I had Mossad envy. It was an incredible story. But I mean, the point is, the Israelis stole the archive and found out how much the Iranians were cheating over all the years on their nuclear program. So I think any deal you make with the Iranians, it's not a matter of the Americans. How can you trust the Americans? No, it's a matter of how you can trust the Iranians. This is a ruthless revolutionary regime that has destabilized 5 Arab countries, made them into unstable, failing countries: Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. This is incredible. And so, listen, I think I'm not worried about whether Iran is willing to trust the United States. We have leverage. We have pressure. These guys, and I saw a question come into the pop-up earlier, this is a country that has a fair amount of water. And because the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has been in charge of all the national infrastructure, built all these dams to make money, basically like wasted all of Iran's water. And like earlier this year, they were talking about having to evacuate Tehran, their capital, because basically the core of the regime like squandered and mismanaged the patrimony of this country. I mean, we know how much money they're sending abroad. And we also know now how they have mismanaged the patrimony, the national resources of this country. So this is not a matter of the United States. So, Bob, tell me the second part of the question again, please.
That was a Bob question, actually. My question is, what's the end game? Because you have all these assets in the area, there's got to be an end game.
Mom, it's good to see you. So listen, I can't predict the Trump administration. I worked for Pompeo, the traditional Bush administration like Republican. I don't know where Trump's going on this. I mean, the Iranians have offered Trump not only a nuclear deal, maybe with enrichment, maybe they'll give away 1.3% enrichment as opposed to the 60% that they, did for the nuclear bomb. But he's offered the Trump administration huge economic incentives, right, to build Trump Tower in Tehran. Maybe this will be appealing to the Trump administration. I don't know. The end game to me, I think, once again, if Trump takes that deal, he's President Obama, right? He is what he condemned, which is a nuclear deal that gives them 3 years, and they make some other vague promises on other issues that will not only undermine U.S. interests in the region, but undermine our partner Israel's interests in the long run. I think he's got to do something, right? I know, I watched the memes. Mom, do you see memes on there? Right? They have the, what do they call them? The taco, the Trump always chickens out. Maybe he'll take a small deal rather than the big deal. I don't know what that is, whether he's going to do that or whether he's like going to go for the bigger deal and when he has the assets in the region. But what I can tell you is that in 2 weeks, right, if we don't make significant progress beyond the nuclear or get exactly what we want on the nuclear, we're going to have 2 aircraft carriers in the region. Now, and I think he's going to have to do something because these assets don't stay there indefinitely. We've got an overstretched Navy. Gerald Ford is due back in the United States. The Abraham Lincoln is due in the Asia Pacific. These carriers have been out for a long time. They have a rotation schedule. You don't keep them on station indefinitely. Now, it's quite possible that Iran can cheat and retreat, say, hey, we'll take the deal, and then back off of it, right? After we send our carriers home. These people play games, and Iran is especially good at doing this stuff. And they want to wait out the Trump regime, like Trump administration, for a more suitable, you name it, Democratic administration that is going to be less prone to whack them. I don't know what the end game is here, Mom, but I can tell you the Israelis think that now that the nuclear program has been set back, that the ballistic missile program is an existential threat. And they always thought that ballistic missiles were an existential threat. And I think if you look at the damage that was done, go online and look it up. How many Israelis had to move out of Tel Aviv after the war, right? How many were displaced? It's a big number. And so I think they can do damage there. It was different. 2003, we had a debate. How many folks are out there? I don't even know. So all of you are old enough to remember 1991. Anyone remember 1991? The liberation of Kuwait, when Saddam Hussein in Iraq, invaded Kuwait, and President George Bush the first said this aggression will not stand, and we massed 500,000 U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, and we expelled Saddam Hussein's forces and liberated Kuwait. Right, it's an incredible thing. But during that campaign, Saddam Hussein put all the Scuds in the western desert of Iraq, and Israel get hit by dozens and dozens of Scud missiles. Right. In 2003, I was working the Pentagon. I was in charge of Israel, among other topics. And the Israelis said, hey, if we get hit, we're going to whack Iran. We're going to blow up bridges and infrastructure. And we said, no, if we get rid of Saddam, we topple the regime. We're going to have to rebuild that stuff. If you destroy it, don't do it. We're going to take care of it this time. And we covered Western Iraq. Not a single Scud hit Israel, attempting to draw Israel into the war and widen the campaign. We can do this if we want to do this. I don't know what we want to do there, but we have the capability of doing it if we want to do it.
Well, Trump has put the comment out there that for the people that are being besieged by the regime, that help is on the way. And no help has shown up. Now, I don't know whether that helps him, hurts them. Certainly, there are protests, which I saw around the world going on by Iranians and supporters chanting Trump's kudos that we want your help that you claimed. So there's a tremendous pressure coming from a variety of other regions. I think in England there was one.
During the Munich Security Conference, there was about 250,000 people, Iranians, that came out to protest.
That's quite something, and standing in the rain. So there's pressure out there. But one of the questions I wanted to throw at you was, does the U.S. have any more leverage on sanctions on Iran's economy to drive it into the ground to force this change?
I think we're doing more. Part of the problem during the Trump administration, when we had the maximum pressure campaign during the first administration, it was a different time. So we had Russia and China sign on board, and Iran was smuggling something like 300,000 barrels a month. Now it's smuggling 2 million, and so it's a huge difference. And maybe it's lack of enforcement. They alleviated some of the pressure during the Obama administration. During the Biden administration. But the bigger problem was really China wasn't on board anymore, and oil is $60 a barrel, and if China can buy it for 30, why not, right? And so we're starting to go after secondary sanctions, and the Indians are starting to get on board a little bit. We'll see what happens on there. Already, the real is 1.2 million to a dollar, right? This is an all-time low. Last month, the Iranians, the regime offered $7 a person as compensation for the bad economy, as if that was a lot of money, right? I mean, it's sad, but I guess it is a lot of money in Iran. There's things we can do around the edges. I really don't think we're going to get China and Russia on board, but things are bad enough, and we can do more. And we see even today, there were things, natural gas facilities, other facilities blowing. Every day there's stuff blowing up in Iran. And I don't know if this is domestic subversion or the Mossad or the Israelis blowing up gas factories in Tabriz in the north. All this is happening every day. So it's a big deal. And their economy is hurting. Whether that will be enough to get protesters back in the street, this regime, and I'm sad to say it, they are willing still to do anything to stay in power. If you killed 30,000 people in 2 days, the Trump administration didn't get there in time. We didn't protect the protesters. Whether we're going to punish them, whether we're going to set back the ability for the regime to have this repressive apparatus come out. I think these are all like pending questions. I don't know the answer to it because I don't know, listen, at the end of the day, you can go big or you can go small. And I don't know what this administration is going to do.
Are there things that we should look for in the news coming forward that would give us indicators of which way things are going, or are all of us in the dark?
No, I mean, listen, you'll wait for the Ford to get to the region. I think the president is willing to give this a reasonable amount of time. But if we seem satisfied with just a nuclear deal, I think that's going to be a problem. But I don't know what clues to look for. I'm looking for something coming out of Jared or Witkoff, or we're not going to hear from a guy named Bradley Cooper, not the actor, but the 4-star general who's admiral who's in charge of the Navy and the Middle East. I don't know what exactly we can look for. There's no clear clues from me, but if there's no broadening of the talks, I have a hard time believing that Trump is going to take a simple nuclear deal.
All right. And Mom had a question about Hezbollah and Israel. Where do the relations stand there? Or are they now not getting funding from Iran?
Well, so they are getting funding from Iran. This is actually one of the more promising, frustrating spots in the region. Israel, across the region, let me just say, Israel did remarkable job. They failed on October 7th. Colossal intelligence failure, notwithstanding huge amount of advance warning, like 1973, actually even worse. If they do an investigation of this, there should be people who are fired, let go. There was a groupthink. They dismissed early warning. They had plenty of it. They intercepted plans, etc. But what they did, not only to Hamas in Gaza, but especially to Hezbollah in Lebanon in terms of degrading the capabilities, taking care of 70% or more of their strategic weapons, advanced ballistic missiles. What they did to Hezbollah, killing the Shura Council, the Jihad Council, drone commanders in the south at middle and low levels, lower than colonel level, then killing Nasrallah, diminishing this organization, enabling the Syrian revolution to succeed because Hezbollah was part of the backbone of the Assad regime in Syria, and the implications throughout the region, and then the 12-day war where Iran was degraded. There's a remarkable amount of military victories. And yet Israel has still not translated a year on after the Lebanon ceasefire in November 24, translated any of these incredible military victories into political, sustainable, long-term political wins, locking them in. So the big one here was Hezbollah in Lebanon. You had in November 2024, Hezbollah authorized the government of Lebanon because it was in charge of Lebanon. They authorized the government of Lebanon to sign onto a ceasefire with Israel. And the ceasefire, they agreed that Hezbollah would be disarmed. And then you had a new president and a new government elected and appointed in January of 25. And these guys, it took them 7 months in power to get the Lebanese army to put in a plan to actually disarm Hezbollah. And they started working first on the south of Lebanon, the south of the Litani River, the area that until 2000, Israel occupied from 1982 to 2000. The South Lebanon, a third of Lebanon, to disarm Hezbollah in this territory. And the Lebanese armed forces started working on it. Israel provides all the intelligence. Hezbollah responds to tasking by a committee that has a U.S. general that is supplied with Israeli intelligence, and they go seek out Hezbollah arms sites. They're doing the work, but they don't want to have any clashes with Hezbollah. They're not doing it enough. They're not doing it fast enough. And where they don't do it, Israel bombs it. So that has happened every day for the last 420 days, 450 days. Israel has killed over 400 Hezbollah operatives in South Lebanon. They have bombed over 350 times in South Lebanon. They are doing the work where the Lebanese Armed Forces hasn't. Now, the Lebanese Armed Forces is supposed to move on to the south. Let me tell you, in January, the Lebanese Armed Forces said they declared that the south was disarmed from Hezbollah. Since then, Israel has bombed every day. And they also, U.S. Central Command, the head of the U.S. military in the Middle East, in February, mind you, in January, the Lebanese Armed Forces said, we have disarmed the south of Hezbollah in the south. In February, U.S. Central Command, the head of the U.S. military responsible for the Middle East, they issued a thank you note appreciating that Lebanon discovered a tunnel, the biggest tunnel ever in South Lebanon, because Israel gave it to them, and they went there in February. So obviously it wasn't disarmed, right? Am I clear there? Mom, shake your head, right? So long and short of it is they're not done yet, and they have to move on, and they're not doing enough. So I think it's a complicated, but at least you have a government there that somehow, is committed to doing this. But they're not doing enough. They're not doing enough fast enough, and they're losing momentum. So United States, back when I was in the Pentagon in 2005, the Syrians and Hezbollah murdered Rafiq Hariri, the former prime minister of Lebanon. The Lebanese, 1 out of every 3 Lebanese came to Beirut to protest against the Syrian occupation and Hezbollah. Syria ended its military occupation of Lebanon. And at that point, the United States was giving $1.5 million a year to Lebanon. I was in charge of Lebanon, among other issues. We started giving them $70 million a year. Now we're up to like $250 million a year. We'll give them more money, but they really have to do more work. They're afraid of civil war. But I'm sorry about that, but they have to do more.
Has Israel and Syria come together in any kind of relationship, or are they working relations?
Things have been tough, Bob. So Ahmed al-Shara, and do we know about Ahmed al-Shara here? Anyone raise their hands? Have you heard about this guy? His former name is Nom de Guerre, Jolani, right? This guy, he's named Jolani because he was born in the Golan, but the Golan Heights. But he was a member of Al-Qaeda and was opposed to the Syrian regime. He lived up in Idlib in the north. He didn't have a pretty, he ruled this territory for 8 years. They collected taxes. They collected garbage. They didn't, implement Islamist punishments. Like if you stole something, they didn't cut your hand. They didn't force women to wear hijab. I wouldn't say it was a tolerant place, but compared to a lot of other places in the Middle East, it wasn't particularly repressive. But he led the rebellion, took over Damascus, toppled the Assad regime. The Assad regime was bad. For anybody out there, this regime used chemical weapons against its own people. It killed 500,000 Syrian civilians, mostly Sunni Muslims. It basically cleansed the country from 12 million, mostly Sunni Muslim civilians, ethnic cleansing at a minimum. This is a bad dude. Very glad that he's gone. You have a guy who's an Islamist, who's in charge, who, maybe has a different view of human rights than us. But I think the jury's still out on how he's going to govern Syria. He said when he came in that, he has no beef with Israel. He's going to focus on domestic politics. Israel occupies a pretty big portion of South Syria now. It's a point of contention. They have expressed desire to protect the Druze community in South Syria. They didn't do so, by the way, when Assad ruled Syria ISIS attacked this Druze community, killed several hundred Druze. The Israeli government, led by Netanyahu, didn't intervene to protect Druze. Somehow they found this now. I don't know if this is cynical or whether this is ideological. We have a partnership. We had a partnership for many years with the Kurds in northeast Syria. They were fighting ISIS. I get it. They did a good job. They secured ISIS prisoners for any number of years. And maybe 6 months ago, the government of Syria engaged with this group called the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, sort of like the Holy Roman Empire, neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, certainly not democratic. The Syrian Democratic Forces, many of these guys were supporters of the PKK, which is a Kurdish Turkish terrorist organization. We partnered with them. They fought ISIS. And then, the government of Syria, when they came in, said it's time to integrate with the government of Syria. Now, you like Trump, you don't like Trump. One of the things that he's been working with, whether Syria, Iraq, or Lebanon, has been the integration of militias into under central government command. And I don't know whether the Syrian government has the ability to control this area and to fight ISIS, or whether they're too Islamist to fight this ISIS, whether they actually like ISIS. But this militia agreed to unify and to integrate into the army. They should have done so. They got guarantees, better late than never, but the government attacked them, seemingly with the with Trump administration backing. Things haven't gone well since. There was prison with I want to say 25,000 ISIS supporters, and they let these people go, mostly women and children, but they let another prison empty out, and there's only 5,000 there now. The United States emptied out some of the worst ones when we brought them to prisons in Iraq. We'll see what happens. I don't know if this is successful. People say, why are we abandoning the Kurds? The Kurds, I love them. And yet they're imperfect partner. They are one of the most corrupt entities in Iraq. Yes, they're our friends and incredibly corrupt at the same time, imperfect. U.S. decisions, policy decisions, I always tell my mom this, are never between good and bad. They're always between bad and worse.
All right, David, that's not a great note of optimism to end on. The complexities that you spoke about, and thank you for sharing that. We're better informed. We will stay in touch as this continues to be a highly sensitive program. We all keep our ears to the ground regarding Israel and its relations and the population, how their anxiety must be at this time, not knowing what's happening next. And I'm sure that makes it a difficult way to live. But we appreciate you giving this feedback. Keep up the work you're doing. Keep us informed. And we're really appreciative of your spending this evening with us, a good portion of it. And we appreciate very much having a connection with you.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. And it's always, are you there?
I'm here.
It's always a pleasure to be with you and my peeps at Temple Israel. So thank you.